I love sociology. As an undergrad, it was a critical feminist, social Marxist, who was a sociologist, that just opened my mind. So it's good to be here. I want to just start off by showing you a couple of images. One is a 1755 colonial bounty on the scalps of my people and the live persons of my people. Is probably marks as the empirical evidence that tells us where scalping comes from. It's not indigenous to peoples of North America. It also, tells us a lot about the first wave of policy against indigenous peoples of North America. I have written quite a bit about this document, done various levels of analysis. When I did my dissertation here, I finalized it in 2011. It marked the first time a Wabanaki person. Wabanaki is where I come from. It's a political confederacy of the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, Bunawabskeag, which is my tribe. Bunawabskeag is also known, or the anglicized way of saying it is Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy peoples. So those are 4 tribes in the state of Maine, which is the northeastmost state in the United States, as well as the Maritimes. So our peoples never acknowledged the border, the US-Canadian border. So where I come from overlaps into the Maritimes as well. My late father's reserve is literally on the border, St. Andrews, New Brunswick. So these bounties were all along the eastern seaboard, and they account for over 97% population depletion of indigenous peoples in North America. This one happens to specify the tribe, my tribal community. And the significance of this, and there's multiple levels of significance of this document, but in today's discussion, the way I'm taking it up is actually quite local to here in Alberta, and to also make folks aware of the connection to what this has to do with Alberta. What does this bounty have to do with missing and murdered Indigenous women? How is missing and murdered Indigenous women the current bounty on Indigenous peoples and Indigenous women? To also make you aware of a reality in Canmore, Alberta. And it's not an area of research I'm really interested in going into, but I would invite anyone here to take it up. But I want to show this to you. Back in 2000, I worked with other Indigenous women in the state of Maine to eradicate the state place name with the word squaw in it. So we had the state place name of the word squaw throughout the state of Maine. I just finished my undergraduate degree. I was active with other community members. We developed an Indigenous rights organization called IRATE, Indigenous Resistance Against Tribal Extinction. And it was like so awesome. And as students, we had the longest sit-in Maine's history. We took over the president of the university's office, and it was awesome. So there's always room for disobedience. What I want to apprise you of is the reality here in Canmore. So just I want to give you a little bit of context. There's a mountain in Canmore known as Squaw's Tit. And as I was doing research and lobbying for the piece of legislation to eradicate the state place names in Maine with the word squaw, I contacted the Native American Rights Fund, who is a nonprofit organization in the United States that's run by American Indian attorneys. And I was looking for the etymology of the word squaw. Like, where does this come from? Because it's normalized in society that it just, simply, mainstream, a mainstream and a really perverse interpretation of the word is that it just means this female woman, Indian woman, a Native woman, right? Which is, couldn't be any worse. I remember my aunt when we were testifying, because one of the legislatures in the Senate had said, but doesn't this just mean, an Indian woman? That's how I've always known it. This is a white male. And she had invited him to come to Indian Island, the name of my reservation, and call a woman a squaw and see how she would respond. And so the Native American Rights Fund, NARF, had explained to us at the time that it is actually, as we knew it as Native women, we know that that's an incitement for violence, right? But the way that the NARF took it up was that it's a anglicized word of saying squay, which in Algonquin language is woman. And it was used as a way to incite violence where settlers would grab their crotches and proceed to rape and pillage the women, by using that word squaw, analogous to the N-word, right, with lynching, right? But it's so easy, we don't even say the S word, we just say squaw, right? So that's how normalized this is in society. So a squaw's tit in Canmore it has not been eradicated. It's still very much well known as squaw's tit. So I really appreciate both of what you're raising here, because the point at which whenever there's dehumanization, there's violence, right? So reduce Indigenous women to being dehumanized, and imagine for a moment, I don't know. I don't even know what a derogatory name is for a Ukrainian woman, but a Ukrainian woman's tit was named a mountain in Canmore. Just imagine that for a moment. It just would be unheard of and unacceptable. So for all of you feminist activists out there, there is a big job to be done in this province. I want to contextualize even further the genocidal document because it's also known that not only were the scalps taken, so back then in 1755, a live man brought in was worth 50 pounds. And in today's currency, that's roughly equitable to, in today's market, about $45,000. And so in Maine, the settlers, the colonial settlers, soldiers that brought in the live men or the scalp, so the scalp of a native woman, of a Penobscot woman, was half of that, 25 pounds. And then children, 12-year-old, think for a moment, who is 12 years old? What grade are 12-year-olds in? Seventh grade, 6th or 7th grader, right, brought in was worth 20 pounds. These were afforded, when colonial settlers were brought in the most scalps or the live prisoners, they were also afforded the first dibs at the Maine coast, at the highest real estate or the most prestigious coast. The Maine coast is renowned, and National Geographic identified it as like one of the top 10 most beautiful places in the world to go to. 90% of the Maine coast is privately owned. So we can see the intergenerational wealth distribution that happens because of these genocidal bounties. The way I take it up, and not only were the scalps and live women taken, the scalps and live women and children and the scalps of the children, and they were compensated for, but the genitalia of women, the vulva was ripped, was cut out off women and put it on the saddles of colonial settlers. And this is as close as, some of the massacres in this area. Certainly in 1864, I'm just going to read an account. In going over the battleground next, and this is the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864, which is just south of us here in Alberta. In going over the battleground the next day, I did not see a body of man, woman, or child, but was scalped. And in many instances, their bodies were mutilated in the most horrible manner. Men, women, children, privates cut out. I also heard of numerous instances in which men had cut out the private parts of females and stretched them over saddle bows and wore them over their hats while riding in the ranks. And so just north of there is Squaw's Tit in Canmore, Alberta. So I wanted to just make sure that there's, that there's an awareness of this, and there's room to do research around this. And I was shocked. I just did a talk for Isabel's feminist workshop in March, and I wanted to make the feminist community aware of this reality. I did some preliminary looking into it, and it hadn't been removed. It's still on Google Maps, and it looks like this. Actually, doesn't look like a tit at all to me, but you can see that it's the level of inaccuracy and dehumanization.